Thank you, everyone, for being here. In the setup for this, it's worth reading. Press Forward is investing more than $500 million to strengthen local newsrooms, so hence the interest in the work. So there may be some questions around how funding for Press Forward works. So Dale, looking to you, wondering if you might kick us off with that, and then a kind of a follow-up question for the group. What specific problems does Press Forward solve for funders, for newsrooms, for the public, et cetera? But we'll start with you, Dale.
Okay, thank you. Really good to see all of you. Some of you I've seen before. I do enough of these speaking engagements now that there always needs to be at least a Press Forward 101. And a few of you may have heard this already, so if you correct me, let me know. So Press Forward was launched in September of last year. It really was created to fill a void around the foundation community and journalism, but particularly local journalism, not national. It was formed with 22 founding foundations. We're now up to 61 and counting. And I'm really proud to say that over half of those foundations are local foundations, some community foundations, some family, really wanting to support local journalism in their region. It was founded with the idea that even though there's a lot been happening in the last 15 years in journalism, a lot of journalism support organizations like INN being created, a lot of new collaborations, we still are facing a problem that just continues to change, right? And in some places continues to get worse, even while we're trying to fix it on one side. And so where is philanthropy in all of that? Philanthropy's role in many places, not just in journalism, is often to seed, to fill gaps, to grow, to experiment. And so we hadn't been doing that a whole lot in journalism, partly because you didn't need us for a long time. You had your own revenue streams. And so what I describe Press Forward as is we're entering a fairly new journalism philanthropy field. And we're scheduled to support in 4 different areas. Infrastructure, equity, looking at the local level, and Tim will talk a little bit about how we work on our locals, and then policy. We no longer debate within Press Forward, should policy be one of the anchors? We have to just figure out what are the right policy solutions. And it's gonna take us a while to get there. We also, if you know a foundation, you know one foundation. And if you know one high net worth individual, you know one high net worth individual. So they created Press Forward in a way that allows for multiple types of investments, which I think is right. And so you can be a pooled funder, you can pool your fund. We have about 11 funders and counting in that group. And the open call that we announced that closes tomorrow is from that pool, that part of the dollars that we have. We have aligned funders. Those are funders who do their independent grant making in their own ways, at their own rules, but they have agreed to go on a learning journey with us and with each other and try to coordinate and fill in gaps as we all do look at research together. And there's a lot of money in that space. And then we have our locals. And that's where we feel like is one of our leave behinds. When someone asks me, what does success look like 5 years from now with Press Forward, one of those measures should be, we hope to have chapters in every single state. Those chapters should be not just funders talking to funders. It should start with funders, but it should be funders talking with their local journalism support organizations, with their journalism outlets, with whatever collaboratives exist, to really think rationally about what does the ecosystem look like in their region, however you define your region. City, state, county, hyperlocal, national does not come in and tell you what to do. But I tell people just remember 3 ways to invest, 4 pillars, and what we're trying to do in the end is to both raise more than the initial $500 million that was pledged, and also how do we work together with all of you and all of our other partners to make the case for local news, that it's incredibly important for our democracy, small d. It's incredibly important no matter what side of the aisle you're on. It's the glue that brings our communities together. And when we don't have it, we now see what happens. And so how do we work together to figure out a way to not just build it back, but to build it back better?
And go to you, Tim, and maybe to you after David. You know, again, what specific problem or problems does Press Forward help you solve from your perspective and your line of work?
Yeah, sure. Good to be with you all today. I'm Tim Murphy. I'm with the McKnight Foundation. We are a family foundation. We're based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I think, Dale, you said basically what I was going to say, that, you know, to galvanize funders. I mean, McKnight is one of the longtime journalism funders in the state of Minnesota. From those of you who are from Minnesota, you know it's a pretty small portion of overall funding directed in the state. When I came on board a couple years ago to help lead this work, there was like a general hurrah that McKnight was finally having someone dedicated to doing this work. That's how small it was in comparison to the other bodies of work that Philanthropy had funded. And so I think on one hand, it's really about galvanizing local funders, being able to coordinate and align funding flows. And then also just to get practitioners and journalists in the room together to convene and talk, to think deeply about what it's going to take to solve some of these big problems that we're all facing. And so, on the other hand, I'll just say, as you all know better than us, the scale of the solutions for these problems are going to require philanthropy to operate differently as well. And so it's also about building the infrastructure on the philanthropic side so that we can help contribute in a more coordinated way.
Thanks. It's great to be back here at INN. I think the room has doubled in size since the last time I was here. So I don't know if that's the Karen effect or the effect of the field growing. We at KFF, I'm David Rousseau. I oversee journalism at the Kaiser Family Foundation, or now KFF, have been in the journalism space since the early 90s when it was highly irregular for a foundation to be involved in journalism. And we worked with commercial media, with nonprofit media, and have worked to try to get more health foundations to support the need for local news, as we've seen our information ecosystems collapse, as we've seen people not trust their local news that doesn't, really cover the issues that they care about. And Press Forward is really the first time we've seen funders get together to coordinate and collaborate and understand the needs in their local communities, to do things like needs assessments. And it's been wonderful to see Dale and her role getting so many Press Forward locals together. Health foundations are one, I think, the really important pillars of a lot of communities that do not yet currently support journalism that have a great opportunity. So wherever you're based, I think you should be talking to the Health Foundation in your community because they are there. They care deeply about the issues of trust and information, and they are going to be a part of hopefully all the Press Forward local chapters. I think they're already part of 4 or 5 of them. I also have been privileged to chair the board of Media Impact Funders, which is a group that some of you may know, which when we started was a journalism funding meeting about 12 years ago. There were probably 8 funders in the room, and it was the usual suspects and just the nationals. We've seen so many more local community foundations and others come together to recognize that philanthropy has a role to play in trying to sustain local news ecosystems. And I think Press Forward has really accelerated that. This is a movement that's being built. It is trying to evangelize to philanthropy, individual donors, family foundations, community foundations, that regardless of what your number one issue is, if you care about your community, you really need to care about the information ecosystem and how they get news and information. So journalism should be part of the toolkit that you use to do that. And Press Forward is a big part of that, of bringing in new members, new philanthropy, new support. And I really do think there will be a movement that'll continue beyond the 5 years of Press Forward. People who start funding journalism see the benefit in their community. We've seen it in the health space, and we'll continue to see it grow, I think, over time. Dale also mentioned the public policy aspects. That's something that we in the health space have seen. The problems that we care about in our communities are really too big for philanthropy to solve, especially in health. It's the same in journalism. We know that the problems that we see in building sustainable business models are something philanthropy can't solve. We need more entrepreneurial people in journalism, but we also need better public policy around tax credits for local news, subscriptions being tax deductibles, new models of finding ways to cross-subsidize journalism, or we're never going to see journalism in poor communities. You'll see journalism in wealthy communities, and you've seen a lot of nonprofits do very well in wealthy communities, but you don't see them really prospering in poor communities that really need the reporting, and I think we're going to need to have better public policy around that. And Press Forward is organizing, I think, the first real contingent of funders to talk about putting real money into that and building something we've seen already in a lot of states, state-level success in doing that. And I think we'll see that continue over the next few years. And I'm really excited about the public policy pillar that Press Forward is leading.
And maybe a question for you, Dale. How do you define local news within this effort? Because that might have different meanings for different size organizations. And
Yeah, I think we've learned to let local define local. It's just not national. That's my line, and I'm sticking to it. It can be hyperlocal, city, county. We've got 2 counties. We've got communities already that are literally across the river from each other that don't want to work together, don't see themselves as local. We've got ones, I love my group in central Pennsylvania. They were multiple counties. They wanted multiple Press Forward chapters. And we were like, really? That's not going to work. And they're not going to form one big chapter. And they're not used to working together across county lines. That's their definition of local. In some places, it's the state. I live in Ohio. I need a Press Forward Ohio. We got a lot of stuff happening in that state. Cincinnati needs to be talking to Cleveland more. So really, it's just local, however you define it. Our chapters all define it very differently. We let that happen. National does not come in and tell local how to define local. We just say it's just not national and it's fact-based.
Great. You talked a little bit about the role of philanthropy in all of this, and maybe I'll start with you over there, Tim. It does appear that there's this increasing appetite across philanthropy to support local journalism. So just kind of curious to hear what the primary motivations driving funders to participate in Press Forward now are, and particularly funders who may not have been interested in funding journalism previously.
Yeah, I think McKnight's example might be somewhat illustrative of what other funders have the journey. It'll give you a sense of the journey that some other funders have been on. So, like I said earlier, I mentioned briefly, McKnight has been funding media and journalism for around 40 years, but it's been a pretty small slice. Now, the majority of our grant making has been going into 3 program areas. We have an arts and culture program. We have a vibrant and equitable communities program, which is about closing the racial wealth gap in Minnesota. And then we also have a Midwest climate and energy program, which is working to move the Midwest towards a zero carbon future. Now, over the years, it's been clear that we have a problem around communications. We have a problem around problem solving, community problem solving, the ability to cross divides. And frankly, we've come to understand that if you want to move the needle on any of these issues that you care about as a funder, you need to incorporate some sort of narrative strategy, some sort of media and journalism strategy, and some sort of communication strategy. So for us, it was a build on our existing programmatic bodies of work. For some other foundations, they fund journalism because they believe in journalism, or the CEO was a former journalist who gets it. But at McKnight, we really see it as integral for our issue areas, and that's the case that we're making to other funders across the state as well.
So I was one of those funders who was not a journalism funder. I funded education and homelessness and children and families and every little bit of everything. And just over time, in several different roles, you just started to see that there was no point to doing some or trying to implement some of your strategies if people didn't know what was happening. It just didn't make any sense. We were doing some stuff in one place we were creating new schools. That was a great strategy, but there was literally no education reporter left in the city. So then what was I doing? So we brought Chalkbeat there. So it's just at some point, how can you convert more funders like I was? We're issue-based funders. But you need to understand that at some point, information and news, whether it's investigative, community, whatever version you want, is important to the toolbox that you need to use to implement whatever you're trying to implement. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And in the health space, I think we've seen over the decades that we've been in the journalism space, the impact that storytelling and putting people at the center of health issues really can make in improving health in communities. And I think the work that we've done at KFF in journalism has been something that other health foundations around the country, both national and now increasingly local, look at as a way to improve health in their communities, is to have more coverage of the issues that they care about, more sustainable community organizations that are producing news that they can help inform populations of what government is doing, what it's not doing. And I think at the local level, that's where most health is delivered. It's like all politics is local, all health is local. The hospital is local, the county health department is local. The people who are representatives are from that place. You really need to connect the dots for people, and I think health foundations are starting to understand that strategic communications isn't necessarily a way to reach people who don't already agree with you, that news and information that is trusted, features local experts, local people from your community, is really going to improve the health of communities in ways that other approaches they've tried haven't. So we're seeing a lot more interest in health foundations in supporting local news. I think a lot because of Press Forward. I was at the Grant Makers in Health meeting last week, which is the meeting of all the health foundations in the country. And in the past, we'd have very small side conversations like, what are those people doing over there? We're talking about journalism. There's 5 people over there. At this meeting, we had about 60 people come to talk about what's happening in Press Forward. Christina was there. We had some of the health foundations who are to press forward local members talking about it. And there's a real groundswell and understanding that if you care about the health of your community, you should be supporting local news in that community. So I think we will see a lot more interest in longstanding commitment that won't just be one grant cycle. I think they'll see it as if you care about a culture of health in your community, if you care about addressing structural racism in your community, you need to have trusted local news in your community about those issues.
There's a different pace and rhythm to philanthropy and journalism, and many local newsrooms obviously need funding quickly. So this could be a perspective each of you have, but how do you balance the pace of philanthropy and the urgent needs of newsrooms?
Ooh, it's a problem.
Tough questions, right? We said tough questions.
Just journalism moves fast as it should, and philanthropy moves slow as it should. Because philanthropy is often about doing research and thinking through all the aspects of the problem. They just are two cultures that are on opposite sides of the spectrum. And so how do we think, and we're grappling with this within Press Forward, is how do we sit in the middle of that and try to help journalists and journalism outlets understand how to talk to philanthropy, and how do we help philanthropy understand that you might need to move a little faster. I'm just not saying that's easy, but that's the problem. And it will take local, I think, conversations, not always at a national level, to get that to change. But I do think the one thing that is, today I am 90 days on the job. Woo. I did not know what I said yes to when Jim took me out to dinner. But I will just say, one of my learnings is just how much regular people on the ground see this issue. They see the need for local news. I was on the plane traveling here from wherever my layover was. I was with a talkative couple. What do you do? Oh boy. No one knows the word foundation, so I never use that word. I said, I work with journalists. Really? And they said national or local. I said, whoa, that's a really deep question. And I said, local. And they were from South Carolina. And they said, it's horrible what's happening with our local news. We really don't get anything these days. And I said, yes, exactly. That's what we're trying to get at. If that couple knows this issue, a lot of people know this issue. The question is, how do we get them on board, feel like they can help, demand news in the places where they can, support that news monetarily? You guys do a great job of telling other people's stories. You don't tell your own. You're gonna have to figure out how to tell your own. You need other messengers even besides you, community members that you're helping. Can they help tell the story, even to funders? When you're talking to philanthropy, you always need different types of messengers. That's the one thing you always know. You guys are going to need different types of messengers. And so we're trying to help figure out what that is. And through our local chapters in particular, help those local chapters get that information out.
And I think a lot of what you see in the slow movement of philanthropy is because it should be slow and it takes boards time to understand an issue when they want to get into it. But I think what Press Forward has done is help educate a lot of community foundations, a lot of family foundations and their boards about what role philanthropy can play in rebuilding a local news ecosystem. And I think we'll see them start to move quicker as they get into the space and have understanding in it. And Press Forward's really been a marketing campaign in a lot of these places of saying, if you care about this issue in your community, you should also care about journalism. And I think boards are paying attention, CEOs are paying attention, and they're starting to move more quickly as they get more familiar with it.
In bringing different funders together on a huge effort like this, just kind of curious to hear what both the opportunities are, but what some challenges might be, and again, bringing together this kind of collaborative funding model.
What's the opportunity?
Yeah, would we start with challenges or opportunities? So I think I'll start with the challenge. I think the pace is difficult. I think not only from you all who are sitting in this room have a call out to maybe move faster. I think ideally in my position, I would love to be able to move faster too. And it's challenging for a number of reasons. We can talk about the pitfalls and shortcomings of philanthropy, but I don't think that's the point of the panel. Maybe some of your questions will get at that, but that's definitely a challenge. A big opportunity is the ability to see the whole. So I think when we get funders together, if you are able to learn, and Dale, you're doing this right now, you're meeting with funders to understand their perspective, their interests, how they fund, how they see the world. I found that with journalism, you can meet any funder within their vision, within their strategic framework. and pitch them on why this work is important. And so I think it's a tremendous opportunity. I don't know many funder collaboratives or initiatives that really can work across issues, can work across geographies, and the way that Press Forward is going to be able to do. And so in some senses, that's part of the reason that it slows, because it's such a big, enormous, wide-ranging thing, but there's gonna be a lot of power in that. And so, 90 days in, it's still early and we're still figuring it out. And frankly, I'm seeking feedback at Press Forward Minnesota. I see some of our partners out here. I see Tanner from MinPost, and I see Marianne from Black Press. And so there's all of these amazing partners that we're relying on to help inform the work and help me understand how I can make those pitches to other funders as well.
You see this.
Yeah, and I think there were some challenges in the startup of Press Forward where funders were trying to figure out how they would continue to support the journalism projects they were currently doing while also supporting Press Forward. And I think there were some, just operational issues in getting started. But now that Dale is there, I think most of the people who are in Press Forward are continuing to support what they were doing before, but also now talking to each other and learning from each other in Press Forward in a way that they hadn't communicated with each other. Funders aren't that good at sharing best practices and talking to each other. They sort of reinvent the wheel and think that they have invented the special sauce that's going to really produce impact in their funding, as opposed to learning from each other and talking to each other. And there's really been a lot more conversation among both the national and then now all the local chapters. And I think that's keeping those channels of communication open are going to make them, I think, able to move quicker and be more responsive to the needs of their community.
Can I just add? I think one of the challenges I've realized is that we have slightly different definitions of the problem. So when I talk to people these days, no matter whether it's an outlet or a journalism support organization or different types of foundations, I always try to ask, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And some people, it's investigative journalism. To some people, it's community journalism. To some people, it's sustainability. To some people, it's just regional. To some people, it's rural. To some people, it's BIPOC. Everybody sees a different part of the problem that they're trying to solve for. Well, when you bring that to philanthropy, that's not easy. So how do we educate philanthropy about the different parts to the problem? Then they can maybe pick and choose where they want to go. Mm. But don't assume that the people that you're talking to in foundations understand the whole. They only usually see the part. You also need to see the whole, though. If you are just investigative, who are your civic people? Because you should be able to describe that ecosystem to the funder so that the funder can then decide, to be frank, where they want to go. I really do care about investigative. Don't assume most foundations understand how journalism works. They don't. They really don't. I had no clue until we brought Marshall Project and documenters, and I have now learned a lot, and I've still got a lot to learn. So just don't assume they know how your field works. You may have to work a little harder to get to explain to them why what I'm doing differs from what this group is doing and why this is important. That's going to be part of the field building, I think, that Press Forward will be able to help with, I hope.
From the newsroom perspective, I wanted to talk a little bit about at least the notion of competition for dollars, but then also the notion of collaboration. But maybe right before we get there, I'm wondering if we might even just talk about like what newsroom qualities are most important or what stands out in terms of receiving grants.
So Press Forward has, the only grants that have been made right now within Press Forward are with our aligned funders, and probably maybe about $50 million has gone out the door from a number of those funders over the last 8 or 9 months. We're still collecting stories on all of those different grantees. We have an open call that's gonna close tomorrow. We're not extending the deadline. Sorry. We will make sure not to do it on INN days next time. We're learning our lesson too. I hope you guys are able to take advantage of the fundraising coaches. We are trying really hard to make sure that we, I'm sorry, I'm just lost track of the question again.
Collaboration?
Collaboration, yes. We're trying to make sure that groups are understanding how important it is to collaborate. And so the 100 grantees that we hope to announce in early September of budgets of under $1 million, we are going to ask them to join somebody's cohort. We're just finding, and you guys have already been saying it, I've been hearing you talk about it in meetings, that going it alone is hard these days. And so the question is, how do you teach collaboration to an industry that is normally competitive? Now, you guys have already done a lot of collaborative stuff over the last few years. I'm learning about a lot of different things. I learned about the Mississippi watershed collaboration today. I was like, wow, that's really cool. I like that. But how do we keep that up? And how do we support it? Are there things we could do? I think Jim talked about, could we help support more business development people? Things like that, back office. We're trying to think broadly, and that's some of the education that the funders want from Press Forward, is where are some of those avenues and strategies we could support the whole field or a whole state in some place or form. So there's a lot of room for collaboration. Of course, there's always going to be competition. We understand that, and but if you're going to be competing, make sure you know who you're competing against, because sometimes you guys are competing over here, and there's nothing happening over there, and that's a problem. How can we rationalize the system a little bit better so everybody gets a little bit of the news that they need?
That's good. And in terms of collaboration, maybe a question for you, David. I mean, as you alluded to, we've heard a lot today about different examples of collaboration, but I'm looking at you, David. Do you have any examples that might, kind of bring something to this conversation in terms of what it looks like?
I mean, I think one of the great things about nonprofit newsrooms is they're by nature collaborative and work on projects across regions, across topics. And I think we've seen in the health space, we started KFF Health News in 2009, which is a collaborative newsroom. We give all of our copy away for free. My colleague Marian Niscari is here and has worked with many of you. And we are interested in trying to help newsrooms that don't have health reporters cover health issues. And I think that's the case in a lot of Press Forward members, is trying to help newsrooms work together to cover an issue where you need expertise in data, or you need legal support, or you need infrastructure. And I think the ability, particularly at the locals, to have the funders and the newsrooms talking together who are part of it will help them share resources, share story ideas, and both reach their audiences with new topics, but also collaborate in new ways that we haven't seen before. But I do think, regardless of what the future of local news looks like, it's going to be smaller than local news used to be. It's not going to be as many professional people in communities covering issues, because you're not going to ever have the advertising subsidy that we used to have to support really big newsrooms in small towns everywhere. So in order to cover the issues that communities need in an increasingly complex world, we'll need to use better technology, but we also need to collaborate and share content, share stories. And I think that's part of what Press Forward locals are going to be doing, is trying to help that collaboration work, but still compete on stories. You still want to, get the story first. You're journalists. You want to be able to report on things in ways that are novel and that inform the communities. And that's healthy to have that competitive spirit while you're still collaborating across trying to cover issues.
Mm-hmm. There's also a Newsmatch. How does Press Forward coexist with Newsmatch?
We love Newsmatch. We would have to invent Newsmatch if it didn't already exist, because you're never going to, I think, get the dollars that we would like to support local news just going through staffed foundations. It's impossible. That's never the case in any industry. You always need policy. You need small donors. You need large-scale individual donors. And so Newsmatch is, I love the latest stats that Newsmatch is raising more dollars from individuals than the foundations are giving through Newsmatch. That's the goal, right? Could it get bigger? Yes, let's hope that. Mm-hmm. We have a number of funders in Press Forward that don't really know all the infrastructure groups. They don't know all of the journalism support groups. They know a few of them. Could we help them all understand who those groups are and how important things like Newsmatch are, right? Even if you just want to give to Newsmatch in California, okay, I'll take that. The goal, it really is to educate the foundation community on all of the opportunities that exist to support local news. And Newsmatch is one of them. So we don't see ourselves as competing. We see ourselves as building on and helping amplify what Newsmatch is already doing.
Yeah, I'll just add to that Press Forward has really been a movement that has gotten philanthropy to care about journalism in a way that it hasn't before. And I think that is going to make it an easier sell for Newsmatch in the future, where you'll get more community foundations that aren't quite ready to do Press Forward local, but they're ready to sign up for Newsmatch. And that gives people an option who learn more about how philanthropy can impact local news to say, this is another way you can participate and another way you can support your local nonprofit newsroom.
Yeah. I'll add one more thing too, and I'm speaking for Press Forward Minnesota here, so not for everyone else. But one of the sort of principles that we've been having, we've been pretty clear about within Press Forward Minnesota, is funders who are contributing to the pooled fund within Press Forward Minnesota. It has to be new dollars. It's not just moving pieces of the puzzle around. And so I want to be clear for all of you in the room, that can be an example that you can hold up in other chapters around the country, is thinking about really goal number one being attracting more dollars to the pie and not just kind of shifting things around. And so we're supporting Newsmatch. McKnight Foundation is for the first time this year, at the end of this year. And we're also contributing to Press Forward Minnesota. That's new dollars as well. So it's additive. It's not a zero-sum game. And I think that's one of those sort of myths that kind of floats around. And in some instances might be true, but I think there's also lots of ways that we can think innovatively about bringing more money into the pie.
A question this group assembled here might have is, so Press Forward also funds for-profit news organizations. Why do that when there are so many nonprofit news organizations seeking philanthropy?
There's just so many more for-profits. I mean, we love the nonprofits, believe me, I come from the nonprofit field, but many of those for-profits are barely profitable. Also, many of those for-profits, it turns out, are ethnic media. And so if we think about equity as one of our pillars, if we think about trying to get broadly out to a number of different geographies, we can't just right now go through nonprofit. Now, there are a lot of foundations who aren't used to giving to for-profits. They can, community foundations can do that. So we opened up our first open call to both for-profits and nonprofits. We're pretty sure we're going to get more nonprofit applications because for-profits just aren't used to asking for money in that way. But we didn't want to rule them out. And we're seeing places where they're coming together, right? So why put them off the collaborative table? Could we bring them in? So we just, from the beginning, it was Press Forward. I inherited that, and I agree with it, that we were not just nonprofit, but we do understand there will just be lots. We should be open, in general, to lots of different types of collaborations. And so whatever that is, I think we should just be open to that.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, we've done a lot of collaborations with commercial and nonprofit media together. We're bringing it together with NPR and local TV stations or local commercial radio. And I think when you're trying to solve the information needs of communities, particularly in the Deep South and in rural areas, there just aren't nonprofits to work with.
Right.
So if you care about meeting those information needs, you need to work with commercial media that's there, particularly radio and television, which are still a big source of information in those areas. And I think if you're going to try to address their needs of the community, you need to be willing to work with those and find ways to support their work that does meet the mission of the community. But I do think there's, in a lot of the new areas, we're seeing a lot more innovation happening in nonprofit space.
Absolutely.
Ethnic media is still, I think, in a lot of places, as Dale mentioned, commercial, and I think that's a really important audience that they serve. So that's one of the reasons we work with a lot of commercial news organizations or in the ethnic media space as well.
That's great. And I think we're going to get to questions in just about 2 minutes. So if people have their questions in mind, we can get ready for that. But maybe kind of a closing question for this conversation, looking ahead a little bit, and we can go kind of around here. But for each of you, 5 years out, what specific outcomes would define success for this effort?
You go first.
Mine's simple: more money to local journalism in the state of Minnesota, and continued, sustained. I mean, it doesn't have to be over. Philanthropy likes to overthink and make things really complex. For me, it's pretty simple.
I agree. More money in the space, more local chapters, and chapters that are willing to really stay together and wrestle with this, because let's be clear, even 5 years from now, there are going to be issues to solve. Yeah. One thing philanthropy is really good at is getting people to a table and keeping them at a table long enough to solve pretty complex problems. And so that's the goal, is to have those chapters around to raise more money. And what I tell everybody is 5 years from now, I do not want anybody asking me, do they need to support monetarily local news? The answer is yes.
Yeah, +1 to both of those. I think it's a culture of giving to journalism among philanthropy that we really want to see become permanent. And most philanthropy knows they need to support the arts. I think they will need to know they need to support journalism in their community if they really want to see quality journalism. And I think I'd like to see better public policy around journalism come out of Press Forward. And I think Press Forward has a big role to play in supporting that, because we need more trusted sources of information about what is good public policy, what's bad public policy. And we need people to go and lobby for it. And there are groups like Rebuild Local News paying lobbyists to go lobby state capitals to pass legislation like we've seen in New York and in Illinois and close to seeing here in California that really will bring real money to local news that I think could be sustainable and long-term and even bipartisan, because the communities that are information deserts, there are members of Congress and people from legislatures who want better coverage back home of those issues. So I'm hopeful that we'll get better public policy coming out of this too.
Agreed.
Well, thank you each for this part of the conversation. And again, now I think there's an opportunity for questions from the group. And I think we have our mic stand set up here. And if you would just say your name and your organization before asking a question, that would be great.
You've answered all the questions.
Yeah, right. Room for a journalist and no questions. What the heck's happening here?
I like that. That's kind of scary.
Hi, I'm Lila Lillahood with the San Francisco Public Press. Thank you for everything you're doing. I have a question regarding donor-advised funds. There are a lot of community foundations where the amount of funding that is controlled there is astronomical, but there's very little that the foundations actually have discretion over. What are you doing to get to that next layer down with the people who have all of this money locked up in donor-advised funds? Thank you.
Good question. So I came from a community foundation, so I understand DAPs really well. And how to access them and how sometimes they are hard to access. We are, well, most of our local, we are now almost up to 25 local chapters, and probably 20 of them are really led by somebody's community foundation. So we are working with those chapter leads to think through how to talk to their donors about journalism. We are doing that in multiple ways. We're bringing those local chapters together in the fall for the first time so they can learn from each other, because some people have had success. We are partnering with organizations that work with high net worth individuals so that we can test messaging to see kind of what works with different types of people and then share that back, right, with the donor advised funds. We are encouraging many of our community foundations to hold like salons and things like that with their donors. We just had one of those in Cleveland, and I couldn't be there, but they ended up having 50 people come. It was like, I'm really happy. So this is why I say this is not fast. It's gonna take a minute to get to all of those parts, but we have to try them all, right? Because they're all important. So lots on that front. So just stay tuned, and if you guys have thoughts or you have messaging that works, please let me know.
And I think that's one of the great things about having Dale in this role is she knows the role of the community foundation. She knows how the individual donors have their own priorities and don't often listen to the staff of the community foundation about what they should be funding. But I think Press Forward has helped raising awareness that journalism should be part of your philanthropic giving. I think over time we'll see more people through their DAFs and through the community foundations support journalism or want to support journalism. And they'll be looking for ideas of what they should fund. And community foundations are a perfect place to offer them those ideas as they do that.
One more thing too, and I'm a broken record on this, but all forms of capital. So in addition to grants, like there's program-related dollars, there's low-interest loans, there's this full suite of options that Philanthropy offers that's relatively new. I'd say the last, 5 to 10 years, Philanthropy's doubled down. But for you all as leaders in the room to think about how you're accessing beyond grants, all of the capital that Philanthropy has to offer too. So that's a little bit longer-term conversation, but I just wanted to kind of flag that on top of the DEF.
Hi, Louis Friedberg with Ed Source and the Sparking Equity podcast. Thank you for all your incredibly important work. I think we all in this room support the need for more local journalism. But I'm just wondering about a dynamic that I have seen in terms of people in local communities who are doing extraordinary work, and their work never gets recognized in the media. Even when there is a vibrant media in that community, but often when there is no media. And I always tell people, don't let the media define your worth. If you don't get covered by your local media, keep doing what you're doing, because the work is what's important, not so much being written up in the local media, even though obviously that all of us in this room think it's important. And it strikes me that one of the things about the new communications age, there are tools that everybody has to get the word out. And I'm just wondering whether we shouldn't be thinking more, in addition to the work we're doing, what kinds of tools we can encourage or offer local organizations who are doing superb work so that they themselves can get their word out rather than relying on another set of organizations. And as you've acknowledged, all of us in this room, and we multiply it by multiple times, the need will still be overwhelming given the number of communities across the United States. So I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
One of the issues we had, I worked for the Cleveland Foundation for 7 years, and we learned over time that although we gave really nice grants, most of the grants did not go to communications. And most of our nonprofits didn't even know how to do communications. And so they weren't always good at telling their own stories. They were reliant on outsiders. And actually that's a problem. And so I think it's a conversation that needs to happen in philanthropy, but also in the nonprofit world. Because you're right, are you kidding? Young people tell their own stories all the time these days, right? They don't have to wait for anybody. So why are regular nonprofits waiting? But it's just, they feel like the money, I would talk to some of them, and they would feel like the money has to go directly to that person, right? Or to the family, I said, but you could make more money or bring in more money by telling your story. But to convince them, sometimes people who are running these nonprofits to do that, same like to convince you guys sometimes that you need a business person because you really want the reporter. But the business person might help bring in more income over time. So you might for a year have to give up that reporter. It's the same dilemma within the nonprofit sector. And so how to have that conversation is not easy. There are some that are more sophisticated than others. And figure out, I really do need to carve out some of those dollars for that or find ways to partner with somebody to help me get that. But I think that's an education that has to happen in the nonprofit sector, not just here, but in spaces in general. That's one of the issues, right? We no longer have to rely on anybody to tell our story. We can self-publish, we can do everything, but we don't. And so the question is, how do you encourage people to do that in a way that is insightful and helpful and not crazy?
Yeah, it's a smart question, Lois, and I think there's a group called the Communications Network that's basically the membership of all the communications directors of nonprofits and foundations, and that's an active topic of conversation there, of how to build in communications into grant making to local nonprofits and how to have a strategy that's not about the foundation's communications, but about your grantees' communications. But I think it's an issue that is really just beginning to be recognized as an important part of any strategy of supporting a nonprofit, is how they tell their story so that they can build community support and get other support beyond the foundation grant.
Hey everybody, Greg Hanscom. I'm the publisher of High Country News. We serve communities in 12 Western states. And my question for you all is really about whether there is room within Press Forward or even movement within Press Forward for some topic-specific work. So, in the West, it's tough to, pull community news apart from environmental news. Mm-hmm. A lot of the work that we do about Western communities is also about lands and water and wildlife and climate change and conservation. Indigenous nations and people, another area where I could see an alliance of funders coming together to fund this kind of work. Is anybody talking about that? And are there some opportunities there?
The answer is yes. We're just starting them. The health people are going to maybe be one of our first test cases. We're starting one in public policy. They had a false start in climate, but I just met those people and we're going to get restarted. So we're slowly, I would say, building them. I will just say we're trying to come up with parameters, I wouldn't say criteria, like what are we calling them? Are they a working group because there's a goal they want to accomplish? Are they a learning community where they really just want to learn together, right? Some of us have done these before. They don't work really well when just staff leads them. It really needs to be a peer-to-peer conversation. That's really what works best. So if we don't have peers stepping up, we may not be doing it for a while, right? Are there some geography ones? We'll see. So yes, the answer is yes. It's kind of like colleges. You have to let people affiliate with the college how they want to affiliate, friends of the library, friends of, pick a group. Same here. You know, how are we figuring out who wants to affiliate in what way? That's going to be our team's job. We're hiring one person specifically just to focus on that type of stuff over the next year. So you'll see a lot more.
Well, definitely, we're seeing a great chapter spring up in Colorado.
Yes.
So gratitude.
Awesome.
We are
Good to
see
seeing
that.
some interesting
Good,
activity.
good.
And it's being led by a health funder there, and I think there's
Right.
there's a lot of interest in health foundations, as I said before, in health beats, but there's also, I think, environmental beats, criminal justice.
Yeah.
A lot of funders that care about journalism, but their funding is really about their issue of criminal justice or environmental health or climate change. And I think Press Forward is going to allow those funders who have a topic-based interest in journalism to connect with the local chapters and understand ways they can feed into supporting those local chapters and get new funders who have not supported journalism but care a lot about climate change, for example, to recognize journalism as a way forward. So those bridges are being, and the connections are being made within Press Forward, but give it a little bit of time. We're just
Give me a minute.
Thank you.
90 days only, remember.
Right.
Hi, my name's Tamara Pompey. I work with the Corporation for New Jersey Local Media. I'll actually see
Oh,
you, Dale, in
yes,
a couple weeks.
yes,
So we're
yes,
looking
yes.
forward to kicking off our chapter. So part of my nonprofit's mission is really modernizing the legacy newsroom and making it more responsive to what the gentleman over here just spoke about. And we've been trying to do that work for about 4 years now, and we find ourselves getting sort of necessarily, I think, shunted to the back of the funding line because new innovative models are coming forward. And those obviously deserve all the support in the world, and we partner with a lot of them. But I wanted to know if you guys at Press Forward make that distinction between legacy and sort of the more innovative stuff, and is there room for that kind of modernization work that I think a lot of legacy newsrooms would like to do, but that hasn't necessarily been funded in the past?
Good question. Come back to me in another 90 days.
The next call.
Yeah, the next call. You know, I mean, yes, of course, that's a conversation. But we have some legacy papers that are doing a great job of partnering with nonprofits and their small for-profits. We were talking with like the Salt Lake Tribune that became a nonprofit, right? But now they're trying to do satellites to other parts of the state. So there are places that are getting money from foundations to do these kind of newer partnerships. You know, so like I said, there's an education that has to happen about what does the field look like? How do you describe it? I just want somebody to map it for me so that we can then see, oh, these 5 legacies are doing this with this. That's really good. These 5 legacies have a few issues. Maybe we don't want to fund them right now. But we don't even have that information to share with foundations right now, right? And that's some of the information we're gathering and trying to pump out so that people can decide kind of where they want to go within the space.
Yeah, and I think particularly in rural areas and small towns, there's a lot of weeklies and others that really need to modernize that philanthropy is beginning to recognize can have a huge benefit if they are given the support and the ability to transform themselves. And I think we'll see that coming forward in learnings out of Press Forward.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it. See
you.
you in a
I'll
couple
just
weeks.
say one more thing too quickly. In Minnesota too, it's not always funding related. So there's a lot of different tools that philanthropy can do in helping, you know, fund a table or bring people together or think about different ways of innovation that are beyond grant dollars. So for sure in Minnesota, we need our legacy organizations who are innovative, by the way. I don't want to, those two terms kind of come up sometime as they're binary, and I don't think that's always true. I understand what you're saying, but I want to make that distinction too. And the legacy organizations in Minnesota are going to be tremendously helpful for new emerging startups, for everyone in between to help move the field as a whole towards what we're all trying to do here today.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go over here, and this may be our last question.
Okay. Dale, you know, you were just in Mississippi on Friday, and I'm with the Mississippi Free Press in Mississippi, and that was an amazing gathering because that's the first time, literally, that we have had that many media outlets across Mississippi kind of come together in one room to even kind of start this conversation. And, you know, a few minutes ago, you had said that we're too often all competing over here and then nothing is happening over here. And that just really struck me as very important. So I think what I'm getting to here as the question is almost kind of getting real a little bit about this idea that I think it's harder on the ground than people understand sometimes to have that conversation about ecosystem. because there's such a tradition of competition. And I don't just mean among the outlets. I mean, like there are a couple now, us and another outlet in the state that, get a lot of attention and get some funding as nonprofit newsrooms. And that's great. But then you start trying to have these conversations with funders of various sorts or people on the ground about, supporting the growth of us or the larger ecosystem, who, however that works. And so often it's like, well, we have somebody here, or we have you, and we have this outlet, and so it's hard to break through that to that conversation about ecosystem, sometimes both in and outside of journalism. And I know a lot of us are kind of frustrated about that. We're from there, we want to build it out, we want it to get stronger, and so I guess the question here, there is a question, I swear. I am from Mississippi. But I don't know I want to hear a little bit more about the advice, some real advice on doing something about that and moving that needle forward. Like, what can we do on the ground? And then maybe a couple of specifics about what you guys are doing around that.
Good question. And when chapters form, we're asking them to do a few things. First is to make sure a foundation is at the lead, because it can't be led by an outlet, because we don't want just one outlet to get money. But very soon, talk to your journalism outlets. It should not be, like I said, a funder-to-funder conversation in the end. We want them to do research on their ecosystem. And in fact, we're giving catalyzing dollars to every single chapter, anywhere from $100,000 to $250,000 over 2 years, to do that research. They could do other things too with it, but we're encouraging them to start with research, because it turns out I had this bias. I thought I knew most of the journalism outlets in Cleveland. I did not. And so we're just saying we all come with our biases. Lay those at the door, do the research, and remember you're looking at where are the gaps. Not just who's out there, but where are the gaps. And I'm just telling you, every place there is a gap. It's not a question. It's like, how many gaps are there? So that's some of the direction we're helping give the chapters. Most of them literally, I don't think the oldest chapter is 3 months old. So some of them are just starting. But Philanthropy does a good job in some places at ecosystem work. That's our job often, is to get on that balcony and look at the ecosystem. And so I think one of the things we would like to emphasize in Press Forward with the national or local chapters is, how are you looking at your ecosystem? Now then you got to have the really hard conversations. I do understand. And there's jobs on the line, right? So I'm not saying this is going to be easy, but we're hoping that chapters will help take the lead on those conversations. And what I was told, at least in Mississippi, it was amazing to be there, was that if not for Press Forward, it would have been really hard to get all those people in a room. Right.
No question.
And so part of our job, is to catalyze those types of meetings and convenings, but they can't just happen once. It needs to be ongoing conversation. Right. So we travel a lot. Our team is to get out into community.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
Well,
Time for one last question?
Squeeze it in.
Am I on? Yeah. This is just, I thought I was cut off. No. This is really kind of following up on the question before around topic areas. So I'm Rob Waters from Mindsight News. We're a national nonprofit mental health news site. We're kind of basing a lot of our work moving forward on the idea of local partnerships and local reporting in places. Even though we're a national site, we're opening a Chicago bureau, where we have plans to do other things along those lines in other places. How does that fit within the Press Forward model? We're like trying to sort of round peg, square hole kind of problem. We're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, we are too.
Yeah.
That kind of an organization doesn't fit into our first open call, but our second open call is going to be in the fall. And it's probably going to be focused more on innovation and transformation. And that could be innovations around partnerships, right? Around collaborations. We're still defining. But we definitely see that groups like yours are important for the locals, right? Because they don't have a mental health reporter. And Believe me, we need mental health reporters almost everywhere these days.
So I'm preparing an application for tomorrow for our Chicago bureau. Right? What do you?
You can try it. We'll
Okay.
see. Not sure.
A better chance in the fall.
Yeah, but you might have a better chance in the
But I think that the health funder groups that'll come together, we're
Be
going to
similar.
try to get
Right.
projects like yours in front of them to say,
That's
if you
right.
care about health in your community, you might want a MindSight branch there. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.